Yud. The first line is base mem Yud. Please take a look at that on page Yud. If anyone's not using their copy, you can pass it on to someone who is, but please look in there. All right, so it says, you see that line, everyone? It says, V'gase aruach, those who are of arrogant spirit, hu she'ein lo bittul. That's someone who doesn't have this bittul that's required to receive. Umuvan asher eino shaykh lekabel dvar Torah. He's not shaykh to receive a dvar Torah, right? A matter of Torah. And as I think we left off the class yesterday by saying, like, we all unfortunately sort of know people that their attitudes are just full of themselves. They have whatever secular education they had whatever their friends told them, and like when you come and you try and impart upon them like a word of faith and believing in tzaddikim or a particular tzaddik, it's like they're just closed. They don't receive it at all because they already have a full-blown reality inside of their head, and they're full, so you can't receive if you're full. Right? Someone who sort of expands his heart like the sea, again, arrogance, which means even when he's busy learning, he's not in a state of true negation. He is still like holding himself by a certain level. So he's going to give an example. Here, he gives an example. I told you before, like not everyone who goes into the Bganim is receiving the same amount of the Rebbe. He says, Talmud, that at the time when the Rav is giving over, think about like the subtlety of what he's saying. He's saying at the time that the Bganim is happening, the Rebbe is giving over Torah. What is the yeshus on this guy? He doesn't sound so bad. He's busy thinking about understanding what's being said at that moment. That's his sin, right? That's his lack of. In other words, you shouldn't be like ruminating over it in your head, because all the time you're doing that, you're filled with your own thoughts. You're not receiving. You have to be mamish like a blank page, and think about like the chosrim of the Rebbe for a second, and you can see like what kind of bar he's holding us up to. There was a few people that they had this title called the chosrim. Rabbi Yoel Khan, of course, was the head of them, but the Jacobson brothers, and like we have still a few of them with us. The idea of what they were doing is seemingly like supernatural, right? They would come in, and sometimes the Rebbe would bring for 6-7 hours, not even exaggerating. And when it was over, they would sit with a group of people and say the same 6-7 hour for bringing back to them. Maybe this guy took like 3 hours and this guy took an hour and a half, but like and the most of the Torah that we have from the Rebbe, especially on Shabbos and Yom Tov, comes from them. You couldn't record it. And most of the Rebbe's Torah is from Shabbos and Yom Tov, at least in the early years. So all this Torah, how do we have it? Is because if they were sitting there trying to, like, so to speak, figure out, according to their understanding, the mimer while it was happening, there's no way they could really hold on to it. They were just like allowing it to be imprinted upon them. And it's a tremendous level of bittul. It's like the moon. The moon doesn't sit there grabbing the light of the sun and say, hold on, let me just like think this through before I give it over to the earth. No, it's just like a reflection. It's a total emptiness of self. And it's not like being unconscious. It's an intentional removal of yourself in order to receive. And this is be'emes. The truth is tzrich be'es maisa, at the time of the actual happening of the teaching, rak lekabel, you need to only receive divrei harav, and acher kach yisbonim b'davar hasagas. Only afterwards can you sort of think it through, right? It reminds me also of a story of the Rebbe himself. When the Rebbe himself would say Maimarim, he wasn't also really thinking about them, right? He was receiving. That's how we understand this, right? There's a prophetic element in the giving over of a Maimer from the Rebbeim. They would basically go into this sort of trance-like state. The Hasidim would sing in Niggin. The Rebbe would wrap this cloth around his hand to sort of like hold him into this world. It was a whole scene. And then he would like give over, right? So one time, he was giving over a mimer to a small group of Hasidim in the early years in his office. And Rabbi Lipsker from Philadelphia, who I had spent a considerable amount of time with, he was chosen like on the spot to be one of the chosrim of this mimer. It's like, because in those days, it was like, I was going to give a mimer. It wasn't necessarily a lot of notice given. So they just like grabbed like two of the best heads in the room. They're like, remember this, right? So he and his friend like did it. And they overlooked they went over their notes afterwards. and they both realized that there was like a huge like contradiction, and they both recorded the same contradiction. They were like, like, how are we going to give this back to the Rebbe? Like, something weird about this. But they had no choice. The Rebbe wanted to their notes. So the Rebbe looked it over, and he wrote like, did I say this? And they were like, yeah. And he's like, okay, if I said it, print it. Basically, like, he himself was just like receiving the situation, It wasn't necessarily like, anyway, that's how it was.
How come, like, we have a lot of, like, Maimar Masechtas that have, like, editing from the Rebbe? Like,
there's something called Mugadika Sichas and Maimarim. So of all the Maimarim the Rebbe said, I think he said over about 1,200, a fraction of them, he decided to take back and sort of like edit, right? And re-edit and put footnotes and basically put them out in a special set called Mamarim Malukit, right? But all the rest of them are what we call Bilti Muga. They're not edited, and they're just as we heard them, or as they were recorded on the videotape or something like that. Daniel, stay with us, buddy.
I'm starting to go chat.
Okay. So anyway, so the truth is that this person, again, it's like he's not some kind of an arrogant person. He's just sitting like front row in the Rebbe's Farbrengen. He's just thinking over the Sicha while it's happening. And this is called like, no, you missed the point entirely. Before the parentheses, and then we'll jump to after the parentheses. He's his own Metzias in his eyes. And he's thinking about how this thing makes sense. And that's the main thing. In accordance with how he gets it. So in other words, he's like sort of like, well, I read that Rambam, and I'm not sure it's like he's sort of like analyzing it with his own little computer there, which is fine. We're intended to do that for sure, but not at the time of reception. At the time of reception, you have to be just a receiver, period. Which means this guy is not a complete bittul of Metzias. He's not made himself into this little yud and just removed his own way of seeing things. The makabel amiti hayu bittul b'tachlis. You want to be Mira Basera, right? That's a whole different story. There's no you. You don't much come with your own ideas. You bittul b'tachlis. Like we saw, like he's told the story when the Mayor came in to see the Rebbe in Yechidus, he just started screaming out loud. He just lost himself completely. It was like a mashugana, like who walks in and sees the Rebbe and just starts screaming like that. He was just not, I don't know. Anyway, it's not a normal thing. I'm saying that. Why was he so beloved to the Rebbe? Because he took more in. Okay. Ubezeh hu kol inyan avoda. How about that? This is the whole inyan of avoda, right? Basically, like I said, a yid is supposed to be like this to Hashem, right? That you are the moon, you are a reflection. It says the Jewish people are domil levana, umon levana. We count by the moon, and we compared to the moon. And it says in the future we'll be renewed like the moon. The whole Jewish people is like a moon. Why are we so moon-like? Why is that our thing? Because it's exactly the concept. You are only as good as how much you let through. You have this nefesh elokis, and it's an amazing thing. But you could, like, if you're a metzias, you block it. And if you're just like a moon, you just allow it to pass through you every time you do a mitzvah. It's not you're doing the mitzvah. No, you're removing yourself so Hashem can do a mitzvah through you. Hashem does the mitzvahs, right? And so this is the whole inyan of avoda, is to basically get out of the way. That's the definition of kedusha. And that is what we sort of ascribe this quality to Malchus, and we aspire to be like Malchus. Malchus gets out of the way entirely and allows all the divinity, therefore, to pour through. Malchus is also called the moon. All revelation, right? There is no such thing as any gilui elokus, any aspect of light that comes into the entire cosmos. It's only because Malchus removes herself, right? And when she gets out of the way, it's like speech. Speech is a funny thing because speech is actually expression. So how does this work? Is this expression or is this negation? And they mamish two sides of the same exact coin. Because we said before, and it makes sense, right? Speech is a faculty which does not have its own stuff to say, right? Speech is just saying your emotions. It's saying your intelligence. It's saying your thoughts. There is nothing in the speech itself. In fact, if you just sort of memorize something and say it, and it's not connected to any thought. That's almost like a parrot. You're not really speaking in the normal sense. You're not using your actual faculty of speech. Like a bird can also talk like that. That's not real speech, right? When you're actually speaking, the function of the words is that they are in a state of absolute reception of the emotions and the intelligence, right? And at the same, so they're like, so to speak, not there. At the same time, they're making all the noise, right? Everything about you is your emotions and intelligence. You only know about it because of your speech. So because you're in a state of total bittul, that's why you're so flamboyant and you have so much like energy and revelation coming out of you. So Malchus is the source of all revelation, which usually if you're revealing yourself, that's the opposite of bittul. So it's an important point. When we say a person is bittul, it doesn't mean they're meek. It doesn't mean they're sort of like letting everyone step all over them. Rabbi Abasera was the life of the party. Okay, he was like the most flamboyant. I told you, I saw him in a sin, like standing up on a table. Crazy guy. He was speech, right? Because if speech is doing its job properly, on one hand, it's like absolute negation. On the other hand, it's a total revelation, like the Rebbe himself. It's called Malchus, right? The Rebbe spoke more than anybody in the world, right? We have 10,000 hours of the Rebbe speaking on videotape, right? So, but he wasn't there, right? Like he said, if I wrote it, put it out there, right? Because he was just receiving this thing. And this is avoda. This is how we should all be in terms of everything godly that we do. It's just coming through us. We have to get ourselves out of the way. So this is David's prayer, right? Which is called Tefillah David. David, of course, represents Malchus, as is known, and he says, like, lend Hashem, right, Aznecha, your ear, and answer me, right? So David is basically saying, Hashem, please answer me. In other words, like, reveal yourself. And what is his criteria? What is his, like, so he's like, what will I do? On my part, in order for you to bring revelation and reveal yourself, he says, because ani ve'evyun ani, because I'm poor. Because I'm poor, I just merited that you should reveal yourself. Open pasuk, right? To the feel of David, who is kashrus who bit to the bechinas malchus, and we know this is not just talking about David HaMelech, the person. This is the sphera of malchus. Malchus is prayer, right? When you say tefillah l'David, it's like the prayer of Malchus itself. And it's saying this is the connection, the bittul of Malchus, nigodel tokef habakasha hatei, this big request, like lend me your ear, right? V'aneni, and answer me. That's a big request. You're basically saying, like, show me the revelation, get me out of this sorrow, bring miracles. Mipnei ma. And why can I make such a request? Because I am poor. Because I'm worthy of your speaking through me, because I'm going to be a correct and proper faculty of speech and basically not like start like, getting in the way. This is the bittul of Malchus. And back to our plot, this is the letter Dalet. But that's all that is what that means. And here we go. This is the corresponding letter in Kedusha to the what? To the Reish. So we say not so the Reish. What's the Reish missing? It looks almost exactly like the Dalet. But what doesn't it have? The little Yud. Right? It doesn't have the bittul. She'ein bo b'chinas a-bittul. V'adarabah b'chinas yeshus v'gasus. And if you don't have your bittul, then what do you have? You have a whole lot of yourself. It's like propping yourself up, making yourself into something. Remember, Yaakov and Esav represent basically the quintessential difference between Kedusha and Klippa. Esav comes over there all puffed up with 400 men, right? And this is basically our own egos. That's what Esav's 400 men are, right? He comes in there, he's got his guns blazing, he's Mr. Big Shot. In the end, he had nothing. None of that was really his. All those men like sort of just dissipated from him. He didn't have anything because he thought he had everything. He wasn't a receiver from the divine life force, which basically made his powers like true and enduring. He cut himself off from the actually true connection to life. And therefore, whatever he was able to muster up for himself, it was like a big lie, right? Because what was generating this, like his little tiny man, how big are you in the face of God, right? You're blocking God's light. You're not channeling it. And therefore, ultimately, however much you think you have, it's poor. That's what we're saying. The word reish, without bittul, It's true. It's a poverty in a different way. The first level of poverty is a holy poverty, which actually turns into fantastic riches. You become the source of the mouthpiece of infinite flow of God into this world, and you sort of deserve it because you got yourself out of the way. So it's called poor, but it really means like exceedingly rich. But the reish, which also means poor, it's literally poor. Like you got nothing because you're cutting yourselves off from the source. And that's why we said the reish in the Zohar is found on the side of the other side, the sitra achra. Because when it comes to the poverty which is associated with the sitra achra, that's a serious poverty. They're not connected to God. You can't be more poor than that, right? And in this itself, that they don't have any connection to God, because they don't have bittul, they cut themselves off from like the light of the sun, they can't reflect it, right? The poverty that they have, in other words, it kind of goes together, because they become more and more yesh, because they're more and more cut off, right? So they get like poorer and poorer, basically, due to the lack of bittul, and the lack of bittul makes them poorer and poorer. So this is the story. Everyone understands the difference a little bit? Yeah, maybe.
So is reish like standing for like reka, emptiness? I was thinking that like with Yosef, he was born, it was empty of water, but it had scorpions and snakes.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should stay with just rash, which means poor. Like rash, the word reish means poor, just because, we said before, rekan is a positive thing. We said a kli rekan machzik, if you're an empty vessel, you hold. If you're a full vessel, you don't hold. So it's poor in a certain sense. Like it's kind of like everyone has to sort of give this a second thought. There's two different things called poor. They're both empty, but one is empty in the sense that it can hold something beyond itself. And one is empty specifically because it's not holding anything beyond itself, right? So it's actually full, and that's the greatest emptiness that you could have, because you cut yourself off from the real flow of the power. But I hear what you're saying there. Okay, Dalit. Let's do this kitzur real quick. Dalit v'reish, shneim perush dalus. Both the two letters mean poor. Dalit is the kedusha because there's the yud behind it, and it represents the essence of bittul, and through this you can receive. And he compares this to a student that needs to be in a state of absolute bittul at the time of receiving, and not so the reish. Little kitzur. All right, going on to Oz Zion. Is everyone good? Everyone understanding everything? Have any questions? We're happy. Okay. Hine Oz Yud sheba Oz Dalid. Masha bezeh mischalek tumunas adalid betumunas hareish huma acharav dafka. So this letter Yud, which is in the letter Dalid, and it's that which distinguishes it from the letter Reish, it's specifically on the back of the Dalid. We have to sort of take that into account all of a sudden. What does it mean to have the bittul on your back, so to speak? Vayud, imshu os zeira mikola osios. Hinehu rosh the kola osios. So he wants to say is that the Yud, even though it is the smallest of all the letters, like we said, it makes itself tiny, it's the idea of bittul, it's also the head of all the letters. Why do you say the head of all the letters? Because according to like the laws of Jewish safrus and calligraphy, kol os hare techilaso os Yud, right? I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but when you draw letters, you have to first make a Yud, and then you drag the rest of the letter out from the Yud. So it's literally the beginning of every letter is a Yud. Therefore, it's called the head of all the letters. That's how you make letters. And this explains the concept that with Yud, the Olam Haba was created, right? In other words, what we're saying is, it's very similar to what we said before, right? Because you're Bittul, you're also the Rosh. Right, you're the like the Rebbe is literally the Rosh. Like he's got all the information because he's got all the bittul, right? And so the Yud creates Olam Haba, meaning to say that like the Shefa that comes into the higher worlds and like which basically contains all the Shefa of all the worlds, it's created with the Yud. Because of this reason, it's when there's a bittul, then it allows Hashem to shine through and it creates the Olam Haba. Dal ze omer ki kol b'shamayim ba'aretz. And upon this it says, right, the quote, Ki kol bashamayim uva aretz. Does anyone know where we say these words every day in davening? Yisrael. L'cha Hashem ha'gedula. You're not supposed to be listening. It's in Yehi Chavod, I think, in davening. But anyway, when we say the words, what's that? We say the words L'cha Hashem ha'gedula ha'gevura v'tiferes v'netzav ha'hod.
No, it's in LeDavid.
LeDavid?
Yeah, that's not it. Yeah.
Okay. I always forget this part where exactly what the paragraph starts with. But basically, you're all familiar with those words, I hope. We say them in davening. You know these words, Yosef Zohar?
What are they in English?
To you, Hashem, is the greatness and the might and the beauty and the splendor. Remember this one?
Sounds familiar.
David said God.
We got to get everybody davening in Hebrew. This is going to be a mitzvah.
It says like Vayivarach David.
Vayivarach David, yes, Vayivarach David, right? Okay, so anyway, I'll say it again, because it's we basically you say all the spheros in a row, right? Vayivarach David, right? Yeah. So it's an amazing thing. It's like the source of the spheros in the siddur, and we say them every day. So we say L'cha Hashem, and we say them in such a way that to you Hashem, which in Hasidic Maimarim it often explains that it's referring specifically to the spheres of Atzilus, because it says they're to you, which means they're like spheres that are like inside of you in the highest order. But it says L'cha Hashem ha'gedula, which refers to Chesed, ha'gedula v'givura v'tiferes v'netzav ha'hod. You're literally counting all the spheros. But when you get to Yisod, what do you say? Ki kol b'shamayim va'aretz. And then what do you say? L'cha Hashem ha'melucha. So you say mamish malchus. You say every single sphera. When it comes to Yisod, what do you, instead of saying V'ha Yisod, you say Kol B'Shamayim V'Aretz. It's a weird thing, right? Except not, because it's teaching you something, right? It's teaching you that Yisod is called Kol B'Shamayim V'Aretz. That there's something very unique about the sphere of Yisod, that it's basically everything in heaven and earth. Because the Yisod is like the foundational point. That's why it's called, Yisod means foundation, right? Where it, even though Malchus is sort of like this big receiver, okay? We talked about Malchus being the Yud, right? We talked about Malchus being the Yud. But really we said no. The truth is about Malchus is that it's really the Yud, it's that it has a Yud on its back, right? And what we're going to see in a second that the Yud is really Yisod, right? And that's what it means that Malchus has a Yud on its back. It means it's davuk, it's clinging to the sphere of Yisod, which is a Yud.
The Chochma is Yud.
Chochma is Yud. Like I always say this to people, it's like there's only so many letters and so many spheros, right? And each one has a certain concept and so it's like when you say Chochma, do you mean Chochma of Atzilus or Chochma of Bria? When you say the Yud, there's many different ways of associating these things. So ultimately, yes, Chochma is the Yud, right? And Chochma means like there's the Indian of like Koach Ma and a state of making yourselves absent, right? So in a certain sense, that is like the poster child for a Yud. There's no getting around that. But obviously, what anything which is going to act Chochma like, right, is also going to be called Yud. So what we're saying is that, first of all, Malchus itself is sometimes it's called Chochma Tata, the lower Chochma, right? But what we're saying now is that basically what is the bittul aspect with Malchus is it has this Yud on the back of it. In other words, as though there's something before it and it's clinging to it. And what we're saying now is that Yud is going to be the Yisod, right? And the Malchus is like, is clinging to the Yisod. That's what it means that that's what it means that it's poor. The thing that it's poor is that it is in a state of receiving. So there you have that Yud sitting on the back of it. It's so receiving. It's clinging to it. It's actually part of the letter of Malchus itself because it's like in a constant state of internalizing this thing called the Yud, which is the Yisod. What do we say regarding the Yud a second ago? The Yud is bittul. When you're bittul, you create the olam haba. Right? And it was all the shefa, all the flow is going to come if you make yourself a Yud. So Yisod, which makes itself into this Yud, is called Kol B'Shamayim V'Aretz. Right? It's called everything in heaven and earth. Because basically it is this state point of bittul, which is ultimately collecting, like let's just look at what Yesod is for a second. We sort of overstepped that. Yesod is in this position where it's actually sort of like the distributor before you go to the department store, right? Before you go to the actual store. Like all the spheros land up in Yesod, and Yesod is the one that kind of hands them over to Malchus. I don't mean to be like, let's say coarse, but let's put it on the human body for a second. Yesod represents the genitalia, right? So if you want to, so to speak, clone yourself, what you're going to do is you're going to take every single aspect of your entire being, and it's going to come out of your Yesod, right? So it's basically collecting the essence of everything else, and it contains the whole of you, and then it can share that. So it's kol b'shamayim ba'aretz, because it's basically like the seed which contains the entirety of the whole enchilada that's above it, right? And so Malchus would then be the woman, right? Like the receiver of this seed in a state of constant reception and enabling the expression to come out. Yeah.
So if Yesod receives and then gives out, we would think that's similar to it sounds like
What Malchus is doing.
yeah.
Understood. That's why it says kol b'shamayim uva aretz. Right? It's everything that's in heaven and on earth. What is heaven? Heaven is above Yesod, and earth is what's below Yesod. Right? So basically, it's true. Everything, Malchus also, that's what he just said, right? I thought Chochmah was bittul, right? Everything in Kedusha, it's the symbol of it being holy is that it is a receiver to some degree, right? And because for example, your seed is also a receiver, right? Like because it's basically allowing everything to come into it, right? And it's collecting your intelligence, your DNA and everything, and it's sort of like, it's holding that, right? But then the point is, it's not the final stage. There has to be like reception after reception after reception. So once your own system has sort of collected and had this bittul of allowing your entire being to collect itself into one point, then that's good, but it's still inside of you. If you want that to be revealed to the outside world, it has to go through yet another stage of giving over. So which means something else has to be a receptor. In order to receive now, your collected receptivity has to now be received by someone else in order to come to revelation, right? Which is basically the womb and the woman who like basically is in a state of bittul holding on to your seed, but it's like speech simultaneously revealing it, right? Because it's a type of bittul which allows it to show. Whereas I guess you could say that the type of bittul of Yesod is slightly different. It's not really showing it, it's just collecting it into a point. So that's why it's more like Yud-like. The Dalet already is some type of expression, but it's an expression of that Yud, because it's clinging to it on its back. Is any of this making sense? It's starting to get the picture together, it's a lot. But the point we're making is that we see that Yesod is called Kol Bashamayim Ba'aretz, it's called everything in heavens and earth, because it is this Yud, which is a bittul, and therefore allows revelation to be in its place. V'targim, the translation of what we said, kol b'shamayim va'aretz, if you look at the Aramaic translation of those words in Vayivarech David, in the prayer, it says, da'achid b'shamayim va'aretz. It translates kol b'shamayim va'aretz as it's one, it's uniting heaven and earth. And what is that sphere which unites heaven and earth, and why is this in the place of Yesod? Because that's the sphere of Yesod, right? Because it unites heaven and earth. What's heaven? Everything above Yesod, and what's earth? Malchus. Shesphiras Yesod bechinas Malchus mekabel mimenu. It receives from it. Umad achid b'shamayim ba'aretz. This that it unites heaven and earth. Hine shamayim ba'aretz. Okay. We're going to get to this now. I think we're going to get to this tomorrow. All right, we did good for today. B'ezrat Hashem. Shkoyach, everyone.
I just have a quick question. What do you